Camera 4 caught him testing the blind spot, one hand resting casually on the polished brass handle of the administrative door, exactly where the high-definition lens bolted to the ceiling couldn't capture his face. The climate control system in the main exhibition hall hummed at a precise 68 degrees, keeping the ambient humidity low enough to protect the canvas investments but high enough to keep the affluent patrons comfortable in their evening wear. Standing near the secondary fire exit, I maintained a wide, tactical view of the room. Earlier, I had observed the gallery's director, Lydia Thompson, pacing within a secluded alcove near the coat check. Her usually flawless posture had been rigid, her fingers pressing tightly against her temple as she spoke into her phone. The acoustics of the marble hall had carried her strained whisper directly to my position. "The facility requires the wire transfer by Tuesday," she had said, her voice tight with a hidden exhaustion. "Just tell Riley I handled the medical bills. Keep her focused on the program." She had ended the call abruptly, immediately smoothing the lapels of her structured navy blazer and pasting on a brilliant, impenetrable smile before stepping back into the affluent crowd. Now, the ambient noise of clinking crystal champagne flutes and soft jazz faded into the background as I monitored the new threat. The man by the door didn't look at the million-dollar contemporary sculptures once. His eyes counted the ceiling cameras left, center, right, then settled deliberately on the restricted access corridor leading to the executive suites. "Arjun," I whispered, keeping my voice clipped and low into my radio mic, my lips barely moving to avoid drawing attention. Camera 4. Cross-referenced the guest list against the active stakeholder database. The man in the tailored charcoal suit near the north admin corridor. A few seconds of static hissed in my right earpiece. Arjun Martin, my tactical lead stationed in the basement server room, operated with the same relentless, unyielding efficiency I did. That's Colson Myers. He is a minority stakeholder in the gallery's parent LLC. He has standard clearance for the public floor tonight, but his administrative access was officially revoked by the director 6 months ago. Sliding the encrypted tablet into the inner pocket of my dark suit jacket, I charted a direct, mathematical vector to the north corridor. Colson pushed his weight subtly against the heavy oak door, testing the electronic lock to see if the magnetic seal was engaged. Anticipating the gaps between the moving catering staff and the stationary clusters of guests, I navigated through the dense crowd without brushing against a single patron. I wasn't here to mingle, and I certainly wasn't here to appreciate the art. Moving with the fluid, deliberate precision of a ghost in the machine, I intercepted Colson just as his fingers curled around the brass latch, applying a downward pressure. "The exhibition is in the main hall, Mr. Myers," I stated, my tone entirely flat and devoid of any customer service warmth. Stepping directly between him and the heavy oak door, I squared my shoulders. I didn't place my hands on him, but I shifted a half step to the right, planting my boots firmly on the polished concrete to completely eclipse his line of sight into the inner office. Colson stopped short. His smile was tightly controlled, a practiced corporate facade designed for hostile boardrooms, but the muscles in his jaw flexed rapidly under the skin. He looked at my dark suit, noting the absence of a gallery name tag and the presence of the discreet acoustic tube winding behind my ear. "I'm looking for Lydia. We have a private matter to discuss regarding the quarterly returns." "Miss Thompson is currently coordinating the silent auction," I replied, holding his gaze without a single blink. "This corridor is restricted to active operational staff. If you require a private meeting, the scheduling assistant at the front desk can find an opening in her calendar." Leaning in slightly, he shifted his weight forward in a textbook intimidation tactic, using his height to try and force a physical retreat. The heavy scent of expensive scotch and cedar cologne drifted off his lapel. I absorbed the proximity without yielding a fraction of an inch, my breathing steady and perfectly measured. "You must be the new security consultant," Colson murmured, his voice dropping into a patronizing register meant only for me. "You should know who signs the checks around here. Tell Lydia the grace period on our confidentiality agreement expires at midnight. She knows exactly what that means. Tell her an external copy exists." Turning on his heel without waiting for a response, he blended back into the affluent crowd near the catering tables, his charcoal suit dissolving into the sea of expensive evening wear. Pressing 2 fingers to my earpiece, I maintained my post at the door. "Arjun, log a verbal threat from Myers. Timestamp it to the current minute. Restrict all electronic access to the director's suite until further notice." 10 minutes later, Lydia Thompson walked down the adjacent service hallway, moving away from the glittering lights of the main gallery. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, a sharp, staccato rhythm echoing off the bare concrete walls. Carrying a heavy aluminum clipboard packed with inventory manifests, she managed the most lucrative gallery in the district with a terrifying, undeniable level of competence. It was the sole reason my firm had accepted the contract, but as she approached my position, her usual flawless stride hitched for a fraction of a second. Her knuckles were entirely white where she gripped the edge of her clipboard. "Stefan," she said, stopping a few feet away, her eyes darting nervously toward the heavy oak door. My access fob to the main server room just flashed red when I tried to pull the auction data. "Did your team lock down the administrative grid?" "I locked it down," I corrected her, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Coulson Myers attempted to bypass the physical checkpoint at this corridor. He told me to remind you that a grace period on a confidentiality agreement expires at midnight. He specifically noted that an external copy exists." Watching the harsh fluorescent light reflect off her pale skin, I noted the sudden, sharp drop in her breathing and the faint tremor in her left hand. Those physical tells were the only metrics I needed to quantify the severity of the situation. Lowering the clipboard, she pressed it flat against her side, using it as a physical shield against the incoming data. "He's here?" she asked, her voice incredibly tight. "He's in the main hall. He wanted access to your office." I denied it. Pulling my tablet back out, I brought up the architectural floor plan of the building and illuminated the screen. If there is an active legal dispute that compromises the venue, I need the parameters. I cannot draft a defense strategy against an invisible variable. Lydia stared at the blank concrete wall beside the fire extinguisher, the sounds of the party muffled behind the thick acoustic barriers. 6 years ago, when the gallery was facing total bankruptcy, Coulson provided a massive influx of capital. The terms were highly predatory. I signed a strict non-disclosure agreement to cover up the origin of those funds. If that agreement is breached, or if he can manufacture evidence that I breached it, a severe penalty clause activates. I forfeit my entire equity share. I lose the gallery. The timeline narrowed to a single, critical point of failure. If she fought a fabricated claim, the board would freeze her out during a lengthy, highly publicized investigation. If she surrendered, he took the equity immediately. "He manufactures breaches when he wants complete control of an asset," she said bitterly, finally bringing her eyes back to mine. "He summoned me to the secondary boardroom on the second floor. He sent a text while I was with the donors. He said if I don't show up and renegotiate my equity tonight, he triggers the penalty tomorrow morning." Taking a deep, slow breath, her professional mask slid back into place, and the tremor in her hand vanished completely. "But I can't go alone. Not with him. I need a witness. A purely practical escort." "I will escort you," I clarified, sliding the tablet securely into my pocket. But I set the terms of engagement. We sweep the room first. No closed doors. No off-the-record recordings. You let me secure the physical environment before you speak a single word. Nodding once, she offered a sharp motion of agreement. Understood. Walking to the second-floor elevator in a heavy, oppressive silence, the transition from the noisy, music-filled gallery to the sterile quiet of the upper administrative floor was entirely jarring. The hallway up here was lined with frosted glass walls, the lighting subdued and coldly professional. Stepping out of the elevator first, my eyes scanned the long corridor for any irregularities, shadows, or misplaced objects. The secondary boardroom was located at the far end, overlooking the bustling street below. Holding up a hand, I signaled Lydia to stop 10 feet back. I pulled an approved RF field kit from my tactical belt, switching the device on and watching the LED display for unauthorized transmission frequencies. "What are you doing?" Lydia asked quietly from her safe distance. "Ensuring the room isn't wired. Myers manufactures breaches. That means he needs an audio recording." The digital analyzer remained a steady, flat green. The room was entirely clean of active transmitters or hidden microphones. Pushing the heavy glass door open, I stepped inside, sweeping my gaze across the expansive space. Coulson Myers sat at the head of the long oak table, his fingers steepled, looking immensely annoyed by the interruption to his planned psychological theater. "This is a private stakeholder meeting," Coulson snapped, pointing a sharp finger toward the hallway. "Security waits outside." Ignoring the directive completely, I walked to the corner of the room, planting myself with my back to the wall to keep both Coulson and the single glass exit in my direct line of sight. "Miss Thompson requested a security escort due to previous aggressive behavior. I am documenting the interaction. I don't participate. I observe." Pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook and a silver pen, I clicked the mechanism once. The sharp, metallic sound echoed loudly in the quiet room, establishing an immediate, unshakable boundary. Proceed. Glaring at me, his jaw working in pure frustration, Coulson eventually shifted his focus back to Lydia. She stepped into the room but refused to sit down, choosing to stand at the opposite end of the mahogany table to maintain her physical elevation and authority. "You're out of time, Lydia," Coulson said, dropping a thick legal document bound in a blue cover onto the polished wood. "I have a buyer willing to acquire my shares and yours at a massive premium. You sign the transfer tonight, or I submit proof to the Ethics Committee that you violated Section 4 of our NDA by discussing the original funding structure with an outside vendor." "I haven't discussed the funding with anyone," Lydia replied, her voice remarkably steady, ringing clear in the large room. "I don't need absolute proof. I just need enough smoke to start a fire," Coulson countered, leaning back arrogantly in his expensive leather chair. "Once the committee opens an official investigation, the penalty clause freezes your operational control indefinitely. Sign the transfer." Writing the exact phrasing in my notebook, I documented the exchange. Shifting my weight, I stepped slightly away from the wall to place myself just an inch closer to the table, adjusting the physical dynamic of the room without uttering a single word. Coulson's eyes flicked toward my movement, breaking his concentration on Lydia for a crucial, vulnerable second. Looking down at the document, then back up at Coulson, her expression was carved from solid ice. "I'm not signing away my life's work based on a fabricated threat. The meeting is over. Thanks for watching." And there wanted the document and for Mormon. Turning gracefully, she walked out of the room. I waited until she completely cleared the doorway, ensuring no sudden movements from Coulson, then followed her out, pulling the heavy glass door shut until the latch engaged with a heavy, final thud. Returning to Lydia's private office on the ground floor, the gallery opening was finally winding down. The catering staff was beginning to clear the crystal champagne flutes and sweep the marble floors in the distance. The intense adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, leaving a heavy, exhausted tension hanging thickly in the air. Lydia sat behind her desk, staring blindly at her blank computer monitor. Standing by the door, I locked the deadbolt with a solid, reassuring metallic click and reached up to pull the opaque security blinds down over the interior glass. "I need a copy of the original NDA," I said, breaking the absolute silence in the room. "I can't build a containment strategy if I don't know the exact parameters of the legal trap." Lydia hesitated. Her fingers hovered nervously over the keyboard, trembling slightly once again. "The document is highly sensitive, Stefan. It contains financial routing data that could absolutely ruin this gallery if it leaks into the public domain." Crossing the room, I stopped on the opposite side of her desk, keeping my hands resting loosely at my sides to avoid projecting any aggression. "If you're not ready to show me the file," we pause. "I will step outside and stand guard at the door. But understand the stark risk. Without knowing the exact terms of the NDA, I am guarding an empty room while he holds the master keys to the building." Her jaw locked tightly as she stared at the glowing keyboard, her fingernails tapping a frantic, erratic rhythm against the mahogany desk. Opposite her, my own fingers drummed a restless, heavy beat against my thigh. Two people completely stripped of our usual defenses, suffocating in the friction of the unknown. She wasn't used to yielding control, and I wasn't used to operating blindly in the field. Finally, exhaling a long, shaky breath, she typed her complex password to unlock the secure drive and turned the large monitor toward the edge of the desk. "Fine. Read it. Read exactly how badly I compromised myself to keep these doors open." Pulling up a chair, I spent the next 3 hours sitting at the small conference table in her office, meticulously dismantling the dense, 50-page legal document. The gallery outside was completely empty now. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low, continuous hum of the HVAC servers down the hall and the occasional scratch of my pen against my yellow legal pad. Lydia stayed at her desk, methodically working through digital vendor invoices to keep her anxious mind occupied. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The shared, focused silence became a strange, compact anchor in the middle of the escalating crisis. Around 1 a.m., noticing her rubbing the back of her neck and her posture slumping forward over the keyboard, I stood up. Walking over to the small kitchenette built into the corner of her office, I boiled water in the electric kettle and brewed a cup of peppermint tea from a green box I found in the upper cabinet. Returning to her desk, I placed the steaming ceramic mug next to her keyboard without a single word, catching sight of her favorite silver fountain pen rolling slightly toward the edge of the desk, threatening to fall to the floor. I reached over, caught it gently, and aligned it perfectly parallel to the edge of her keyboard. Pausing mid-sentence on her screen, she looked at the precisely aligned pen, then up at me, her eyebrows raised in genuine, quiet disbelief. Did you just organize my desk during an active extortion crisis? Chaos in the environment breeds chaos in the mind, I replied flatly, keeping my face completely deadpan. A tiny, exhausted huff of amusement escaped her lips. The light sound broke the crushing tension in the room instantly. Picking up the warm mug, her shoulders dropped a full inch as she inhaled the soothing peppermint steam. Section 4, paragraph B, I said, returning to my chair and flipping back to my organized notes. The penalty clause requires a verified, digital footprint of a breach. He can't just claim you spoke to someone verbally. He needs a verifiable email, a text message, or a recorded audio file. That means his primary angle of attack will be digital. I'm having Arjun isolate your network right now. We need isolated offline drives installed immediately to secure the current iteration of the ledger. Frowning, Lydia looked at the digital clock glowing on her screen. Procurement takes a minimum of 3 days to approve new hardware expenses. We don't have that kind of time. Already handled, I said, packing my notes into my tactical case and snapping the heavy latches shut. I authorized the hardware rush delivery on my firm's operational tab an hour ago. It is a documented vendor guarantee, fully reimbursable through your standard accounts payable at the end of the quarter. No strings attached. No leverage applied. If you want to cancel it in the morning, the invoice simply voids. Looking at me over the rim of her mug, the guarded defensiveness eased further from her expression, replaced by a quiet, dawning respect for the logistics. Suddenly, a sharp, aggressive knock on the glass door shattered the quiet sanctuary of the office. Moving instantly, I stepped between Lydia and the door, my right hand dropping instinctively to my radio. Through the frosted glass, I could see the distinct silhouette of a man shifting his weight impatiently. Unlocking the deadbolt, I pulled the door open exactly 3 inches, blocking the gap entirely with my body, leaving absolutely no room for anyone to push past. It was one of the gallery's senior board members, an older man notorious for his intrusive micromanagement. Stefan, isn't it? The board member asked, peering over my shoulder, desperately trying to catch a glimpse of Lydia inside. I saw the lights on from the street. The rumor mill is spreading that Coulson Myers is withdrawing his massive equity. Is there a problem I need to be aware of? Miss Thompson is currently engaged in a closed operational audit, I said, my voice entirely devoid of any conversational warmth, deference, or hesitation. All inquiries regarding board equity must be submitted in writing to the legal department during standard business hours. I just want a quick word with the director, he insisted, trying to step his expensive leather shoe forward into the narrow gap. I didn't budge. I held my ground like a vault door. The office is closed. Good night, sir. Firmly pushing the door shut directly in his face, I engaged the deadbolt with a metallic click that echoed loudly in the room. By morning, his quick word would undoubtedly become a formal email, proof the rumor was already weaponized to create panic among the stakeholders. No one gets past the perimeter, I told Lydia quietly, turning back to face her. Go home. Get some sleep. Arjun and I will hold the network overnight. The real threat arrived with the devastating subtlety of a detonating wire. It was day 8 of the contract. The localized architecture was holding perfectly, but the atmosphere in the gallery was continuously suffocating. Down in the basement server room with Arjun, I was reviewing the overnight firewall logs line by exhausting line. The air was frigid down here, designed strictly for machines, smelling faintly of ozone and hot electronics. Everything was green on the primary monitors. Then, my encrypted phone vibrated violently against the metal desk. It was an emergency alert from the external monitoring software I had set up to scan public financial forums and corporate watchdogs for the gallery's name. Opening the alert, my eyes scanned the harsh red text. Arjun, check the external mail server routing. Did anything bypass the outbound filter? Negative, Arjun replied, typing rapidly, his focused face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the monitor. Outbound is locked tight. Not a single unauthorized byte has left this building. The alert hit my screen in full resolution, and seconds later, the faint, overlapping trill of 3 separate office phones began ringing in chaotic unison from the floor above. Coulson hadn't hacked Lydia's system. He hadn't bypassed the firewall. He had walked entirely around it. He had leaked his own external copy of the document from an untraceable server, forging the metadata to make it look exactly like it originated from a whistleblower within Lydia's administrative staff. Sprinting up the concrete stairs, bypassing the slow service elevator entirely, my boots hit the steps with rhythmic, heavy thuds. Pushing through the fire doors, I moved rapidly down the administrative hallway. The gallery was open for business, daytime patrons milling about the artwork in the front, completely oblivious to the catastrophic failure happening behind the frosted glass doors. Keying into Lydia's office, she was already standing behind her desk, staring at her computer screen, her face entirely devoid of color. The multi-line phone on her desk was flashing rapidly with incoming calls from the furious board of directors. "They all have it," Lydia whispered, her voice hollow, stripped of its usual commanding presence. "The lead investor just emailed me. They're convening an emergency board review on Friday morning. They're going to invoke the penalty clause and strip my shares." Beginning to pace the length of the room, her breathing grew shallow and rapid. 6 years of work. 6 years of building this place into something legitimate. And he destroys it with one spoofed email. The document is real. Stopping near the large window overlooking the bustling avenue, she wrapped her arms tightly around her ribs, shrinking into herself in a moment of terrifying, overwhelming pressure. Swallowing the sudden, sharp instinct to pull her away from the glass and wrap her in my heavy coat, I forced my hands to remain perfectly still at my sides. I anchored my boots to the floor and lowered my voice an entire octave, letting the cold, hard gravity of the room settle over us to combat the rising panic. "The document is real," I acknowledged, my tone cutting clearly through the frantic ringing of the phones. "But the narrative is false. He used an external server to spoof the origin address. The board doesn't care about the origin. They care about the scandal," she said, her voice tight and desperate. "The ethics committee will demand my resignation by Friday. Then we don't argue the scandal, we argue the extortion. If we can prove Coulson leaked the document himself, it gives your counsel immediate, actionable grounds to challenge the enforcement of the penalty clause." Stepping forward, I stopped respectfully at an arm's length, refusing to crowd her. "You don't resign. Let me do my job." Nodding slowly, a grim, practical trust replaced the panic in her eyes. By 2 a.m. on Wednesday, we were back down in the server room. The chill of the underground room was biting, seeping through the soles of our shoes. Sitting on a metal folding chair nearby, Lydia reviewed legal precedents on her tablet, her teeth chattering slightly in the cold air. Standing up, I walked over to the supply closet, pulled out a small ceramic space heater, and plugged it in directly near her feet. Finding a clean, heavy-moving blanket, I draped it carefully over the back of her chair. I didn't announce the action or ask for gratitude. I simply went back to my terminal, combing endlessly through the transmission logs. A few minutes later, she stood up, picked up my empty coffee mug from the metal desk, and walked out of the server room. When she returned, she placed a fresh, steaming mug of dark roast coffee exactly beside my keyboard. A small, yellow sticky note was attached to the ceramic curve. It read in neat handwriting, "Tea's in the cabinet. Don't pretend you don't need it." Reading the note, a tiny fraction of the tension left my jaw. Reaching out, I aligned the mug perfectly with the edge of the keyboard, acknowledging the returned favor without a single spoken word. "There's something you need to know," Lydia said quietly, breaking the endless drone of the cooling fans. "Before Friday's meeting, I didn't take his money for the gallery." Stopping my typing, I turned my chair to face her completely, giving her my undivided attention. "My younger sister, Riley," she continued, her voice thick with old, heavy guilt. "She was struggling with severe addiction back then. She had forged my signature on several gallery checks to buy drugs, nearly bankrupting the operating account before I caught it. Coulson found out. He offered to cover the deficit entirely and pay for her private rehabilitation, but only if I signed over 30% of my equity and signed the NDA. If the board digs into the original financial records to verify the leak, they won't just find his dirty money. They'll find Riley's forgery. I can't let her go to prison, Stefan. She's clean now. She has a husband and a daughter." The variables shifted massively. I couldn't just expose the NDA. I had to expose the extortion without triggering a forensic audit of the gallery's early ledgers. "Understood," I said. Turning my chair back to the keyboard, my fingers rested lightly on the home row. We changed the tactical approach. We attacked the execution of the leak exclusively. Lydia looked genuinely surprised. "You aren't angry that I lied by omission?" Anger doesn't fix the firewall, I replied bluntly, my fingers flying across the keys in a blur of motion. You protected your perimeter. Now I protect yours. By sunrise, the relentless digging finally paid off. Hitting a command prompt, the laser printer in the corner whirred loudly to life, spitting out a crisp sheet of paper. I found the crack in his armor. The PDF metadata contains a hidden timestamp generated by a machine registered to Coulson's private investigative firm. He hired a third party to spoof the email. That isn't just a breach. It constitutes illegal corporate espionage. Gathering the warm paper from the tray, I slid the printout under the desk lamp. The timestamp stared back at us in stark black ink. We have the ammunition. Friday morning arrived with a bleak, sterile atmosphere of a corporate execution. The board meeting was held in the primary conference room on the top floor. The massive mahogany table stretched 20 feet, reflecting the gray, overcast sky from the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was surrounded by 10 senior investors, their faces grave and unforgiving. Coulson Myers sat near the head of the table, projecting an aura of solemn, calculated concern. Lydia stood at the opposite end, wearing a sharp, tailored suit that served as her final armor. I stood against the back wall, directly behind her. My entry was entirely legitimate. My contractor badge was still active under the emergency IT inspection permit, keeping me lawfully inside the room. Miss Thompson, the board chairman began, steepling his fingers on the polished wood. The origin of the capital injection 6 years ago was concealed from this board. Under the terms of your operating agreement, this constitutes absolute grounds for immediate termination. Placing her hands flat on the table, Lydia leaned forward slightly. She commanded the room with absolute authority. The document you received is authentic, Lydia stated, admitting the lie to strip away its power. I accepted capital from a compromised source 6 years ago under extreme duress to protect a vulnerable family member. It was a mistake, and I take full accountability. Coulson's smug expression faltered, a flash of genuine surprise crossing his carefully constructed features. Admitting to the breach doesn't save your job, Lydia. The penalty clause is triggered. I didn't trigger the breach, Lydia countered, her voice ringing clear and hard over the noise. You did. She looked back at me, a silent, definitive command. Stepping forward, I placed my leather briefcase on the table and unlocked it with a sharp, dual click that echoed loudly in the silent room. Extracting 10 bound folders, I slid them down the long table to the waiting investors. My name is Stefan Carter, an independent corporate security consultant, I stated, projecting my voice clearly. The folders in front of you contain certified forensic printouts. They prove unequivocally that the email was routed through a proxy server operated by a private investigative firm retained by Coulson Myers. Coulson stood up abruptly, his heavy chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, his face flushing a dark, furious red. This is absurd. He's fabricating data. Pulling out a final, heavy document from my case, I held it up. My attorney has already drafted a formal cease and desist, paired with a notarized draft complaint detailing Mr. Myers' illegal electronic surveillance, verified by an independent auditing firm. The courier is standing by. Under state law, any contract penalty triggered via illegal corporate espionage gives our counsel immediate grounds to file an injunction against the penalty clause. If Coulson Myers is not suspended immediately pending a full investigation, this packet goes straight to the district attorney's cybercrimes division. Handing the legal notice directly to the chairman, I locked eyes with Coulson. The choice is yours. The room went dead silent. The investors looked from the undeniable, verified data in their hands to Coulson, who was suddenly looking frantically toward the exit. The extortion was documented. The leverage was completely destroyed. An hour later, the administrative floor was completely quiet. The board had suspended Coulson pending the criminal investigation. Standing in Lydia's office, I packed my RF scanner into my tactical case. I pulled the updated contract from my folder and set it carefully on the desk. I had adjusted the ongoing security retainer to a standard monthly schedule. It was clean, legally documented, and renewable only if she explicitly requested it. Stability, not dependency. Lydia stood by the window, watching the busy city traffic below. Turning around, she walked slowly over to my desk. Picking up my silver fountain pen, which had rolled slightly askew during my packing, she placed it perfectly parallel to the edge of my tactical case. A tiny, quiet echo of the long nights we spent holding the line. The firewall is holding, I told her, zipping the heavy canvas case. Arjun will monitor the logs remotely. Walking toward the door, I stopped at the threshold. My hand rested on the heavy, cold metal of the deadbolt. Stefan, wait, she said. Turning slowly, I faced her. She crossed the room, stopping exactly 2 feet away. The proximity was grounded, entirely devoid of the crushing pressure we had lived under. You didn't just secure the network. You gave me my life back. You stood there and took the hit for me. She took a slow, deep breath, her sharp executive armor completely gone. I trusted you on day 1, she corrected softly, and I want you here for day 9. I remained perfectly still, letting her define the boundary and set the terms. Offering a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes, she continued, I have an appointment at the police precinct tomorrow morning to officially sign the cybercrimes complaint against Coulson. I just sent an email to Arjun and the board council. I told them my partner will be attending the precinct with me. She had made the choice. A clean, highly practical, public choice. What time? I asked, my voice finally losing its rigid edge. 8 a.m., she replied. I'll be there, I said. Reaching out, my hand gently covered hers for a brief, solid moment. The climate control system in the main exhibition hall hummed at a precise 68 degrees, and as the heavy metallic click of the deadbolt echoed in the quiet room, for the first time, she didn't look cold inside it. I learned that love isn't about holding on tight or controlling every variable. It's about knowing they will come back if you let go. Real love isn't about dramatic rescues. It's about consistency, safety, and showing up with absolute integrity when the world tries to tear you down. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.